It started like an eviction always starts, in 5 points. Too early, too cold, and with a violent pounding on the door. The father woke first, because fathers in this neighborhood never really slept. He rolled out of bed and found the room already wrong. The air colder than it should be. The candle flame weak. The little boy was awake too, rubbing his eyes.
The daughter clutched her blanket and whispered, "Pa?"
And the mother, still half dreaming, sat up slowly, already sensing what the others couldn't name. The father reached for the door with shaking hands and opened it a crack. A tall man in dark, refined clothing stood there, pale as stone, smiling faintly like he'd been invited. Behind him, a woman with a velvet voice and stage-light beauty leaned in close to the doorframe, and behind her stood a colder woman holding a ledger. The father tried to speak, but his throat didn't work right. The pale man's eyes moved over the room, over the family, inspecting. He spoke softly, almost politely. "This building has been purchased." The father swallowed. "By who?" The pale man's smile deepened by a hair, amused. "By me."
The mother stood, barefoot on the boards, pulling her robe tighter. "We paid rent," she said. "We don't cause trouble."
The man looked at her with something cold. "You misunderstand," he murmured. "This isn't about rent." The father stepped forward, trying to make himself bigger than he was. "You can't." But the cold woman with the ledger glanced up without emotion, and the father's voice died in his mouth. He couldn't move, shout, or even blink properly. His hands trembled at his sides, useless.
Serafina tilted her head and smiled. "Oh," she whispered, almost kindly. "He wants to be brave."
Ravanos entered without waiting. The room felt smaller the moment he crossed the threshold. He walked slowly, not stalking, not rushing. He took ownership with each step. He stopped near the mother and studied her face. A collector.
The mother's eyes filled, but she didn't scream. In 5 points, screaming only tells the world where to look. "Please," she said, voice cracking. "My children—"
Ravanos lifted one hand, gentle as a priest, offering comfort, and the mother went still, not frozen like the father, worse, quiet, listening. Ravanos leaned closer, voice soft enough to feel like a private thought to inside her skull. "You've been hungry a long time," he said. "Haven't you?" The mother's lip trembled. The father tried to lunge, couldn't.
The daughter reached for her mother, small fingers outstretched. "Ma..." But Serafina slipped behind the girl like a shadow in silk and lowered her mouth near the child's ear. "Shh," Serafina breathed, smiling as if they were sharing a bedtime secret. "If you make a sound, he might notice you next." The girl froze, eyes wide, breath trapped in her throat.
And then Colette, calm as ice, looked down at the little boy. The boy stared back, confused, still half asleep. Colette crouched, lifted him with effortless ease, and held him against her shoulder like a mother would, if the mother felt nothing at all. She examined his face with quiet delight and said, almost conversationally, "Why aren't you just the perfect snack?"
Ravanos actually laughed, like Colette had told a clever joke. The father's eyes went wild. He tried to beg. His mouth wouldn't form words. Ravanos turned his attention back to him, smile fading into something more instructive. "Listen carefully," Ravanos said, voice still gentle. "You survive if you learn what not to speak about." He let that sit in the air, heavy as a coffin lid. If word of tonight travels, he continued, I will assume you want me to return. Ravanos' gaze slid to the daughter, still rigid under Serafina's whisper, and the father felt the threat land where it was meant to land. Ravanos stepped to the mother and offered his hand, like a gentleman offering a dance. The mother's eyes overflowed, but her body obeyed. She took his hand. The father made a sound, half sob, half rage, and it died in his throat. Ravanos led the mother toward the door.
The daughter reached again, desperate now, fingers trembling. Ma! And Serafina tightened her hold, smiling as she hushed her once more. Quiet little bird, Serafina murmured. He's taking her somewhere warm. Colette adjusted the boy on her hip, unbothered, already bored with him as soon as she'd decided he was perfect.
Ravanos paused at the doorway and looked back at the father one last time, eyes restrained and bright with certainty. Be grateful, he said softly. I am merciful tonight. Then he led the mother out into the fog. She belonged to him. The door closed on the father's helpless silence. And later, the mother will return, pale, changed, eyes empty with sorrow, not a monster roaring in the streets. Something worse, a servant, a quiet vampire who follows Ravanos' commands like she's already dead, still carrying depression like a chain she can't break.
15 years in New York taught Elias one truth the sea never could. A city doesn't need storms to swallow you. It only needs paperwork, a signature, a deed, a handshake in a back room. And suddenly, the ground beneath your feet belongs to someone else. That winter, 5 Points began changing. Slow at first, then all at once. A butcher shop that had been in the same Irish family for 2 decades shut its doors in a single day. The owner vanished. A tenement landlord who used to threaten tenants about late rent started fixing broken stairs and patching leaks like he'd found religion. The next week, a new man stood outside the building with a clean coat and hard eyes, collecting protection money in the name of order. Men who didn't pay got visited. Quietly, they got reminded, and then they disappeared. 5 Points had always been violent. Everyone knew that. Fists were honest. But this felt different. This felt organized. It felt like someone was pulling strings behind the scenes. And the neighborhood, full of people who'd survived everything, started whispering the same phrase in different languages, with fear.
Someone new runs these streets.
In 5 Points, power usually announced itself with noise. This power moved in silence. What terrified people most wasn't that they didn't know who it was. It was that they knew better than to ask. Elias noticed the changes the way Crowley trained him to notice everything. Patterns in small things. The same men appearing on different corners, wagons delivering crates at odd hours. The same 2 or 3 front owners purchasing properties nobody in 5 Points could afford. Men with clean hands, clean records, and the dead-eyed calm of people who didn't belong in this neighborhood. Front men, masks. Elias collected the names in a notebook and watched them the way he watched suspects in alleys. He followed one to a small office above a pawn shop. Watched him hand a stack of papers to a man Elias had never seen before. Who didn't smile, who didn't speak, who didn't even look like he belonged in a city built on noise. Elias felt something in his ribs tighten. Not fear, recognition. That same cold certainty he'd felt on the ship. When the first bodies appeared. When the corridors grew quieter. When Ravanos walked like he owned the night. Elias went back to the agency and opened the missing persons ledger. New York always had missing people, one of the city's favorite tricks. But these weren't drunks who fell into the river or women who ran off with lovers. These were working men. Stable men. Men with routines. A cobbler who always closed at the same hour. a clerk who never missed Sunday Mass, a widower who lived 3 doors down from the butcher shop. Elias drew a line beneath the names. Then he drew another line beneath the addresses. He stared at the list until the pattern became clear. Every missing person lived near a business paying protection, or worked at one, or owed money to one. The protection wasn't just money. It was a net. Elias brought the ledger to Crowley that evening. Crowley was at his desk, coat still on, ash in the tray, eyes irritated like the world itself had inconvenienced him. Elias didn't sit. He placed the ledger down. "I want to show you something," Elias said.
Crowley didn't look up at first. If it's another husband crying about his wife, save it.
"It isn't," Elias said.
Crowley's eyes flicked to the book. What is it?
"Missing persons," Elias said. "Not the usual."
Crowley finally leaned in, scanned the names, the addresses, the marks Elias had made. Crowley grunted. "You think this is connected?"
Elias tapped the list. "It's protection," he said. "Same collectors, same corners, same businesses."
Crowley's brows furrowed. "So we've got a crew running the neighborhood."
Elias didn't blink. "Bigger than a crew."
Crowley snorted. "Everything's bigger when you don't know what you're looking at."
Elias's voice stayed calm. "I know what I'm looking at."
Crowley met his eyes for a moment, long enough to measure him. Then leaned back, exhaled smoke, and said, "All right, we'll take a look." Quietly.
Elias nodded. Quietly was how you stayed alive. But the city didn't let you investigate quietly for long. 2 nights later, Crowley didn't show up to the office on time. That alone was wrong. Crowley was a creature of routine. If the world ended, Crowley would still be at his desk to complain about it. When he finally arrived, he looked like he'd been squeezed through a doorframe. Hat pulled low, jaw tight, and his right hand kept touching the inside pocket of his coat, like he was checking something was still there. Elias watched him cross the room and lock the office door behind him.
Crowley didn't sit right away. He stood near the window, staring at the street like it might bite him. Then he said, without looking at Elias, "We're dropping it."
Elias didn't move. "Dropping what?"
Crowley turned. His eyes were sharper than usual. "This protection business, these disappearances. You heard me."
Elias took a slow breath. "Why?"
Crowley's mouth tightened. "Because it's not our job."
Elias almost smiled. Not because it was funny, but because it was a lie too clumsy for Crowley. Crowley didn't lie well when he was afraid. Elias stepped closer. "Who spoke to you?" Crowley's gaze flickered just once. The smallest betrayal of truth. That was enough. "They came here," Elias said, careful. "To you."
Crowley's voice turned rough. "You don't know what you're poking."
Elias didn't raise his voice. "Tell me?"
Crowley's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. Then he said, low, "A man in a fine coat visited me last night. He knew my name. He knew where I sleep. He knew the name of my niece." Elias felt his stomach drop, but his face stayed still. Crowley leaned forward, and for the first time in years, Elias saw something in him that looked like naked anger and fear. "He told me," Crowley said, "that if we kept digging, my niece would have an accident."
Elias's throat tightened. "He threatened your family."
Crowley's lips curled. "Seems so." Crowley stabbed a finger toward the ledger. "So we drop it."
Elias's voice stayed even, but colder. "We can't bargain with men like that."
Crowley snapped. "You think these are just men?" Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. Crowley's eyes narrowed, as if he'd said too much. The office was silent for a long moment, except for the city outside. Then Crowley said, quieter, "They own police. They own judges. They own half the ward bosses. They own... He stopped. He swallowed. They own things you can't buy.
Elias's mind clicked into place. Colette, Serafina, the ledger, the calm money counting, Ravanos. Elias said softly, "It's him."
Crowley's eyes hardened. I don't care who it is. I care that you stop.
Elias's gaze didn't move. "I can't."
Crowley stared at him like he was watching a man step toward a cliff. You're going to get yourself killed, Crowley said.
Elias nodded once. "Maybe."
Crowley's hands curled into fists. And you'll get me killed with you.
Elias didn't flinch. "I won't bring it to your door again."
Crowley's laugh was humorless. You think doors matter? Elias stepped back, picked up the ledger, and tucked it under his coat. Crowley's voice came out sharp. Elias, listen to me. Elias paused at the door. Crowley's face tightened, and for a second, he looked older than his years. This isn't bravery, Crowley said. It's stupidity.
Elias looked back. His eyes were tired. "It's debt," he said, "and I've been paying it for 15 years. He left before Crowley could answer. Outside, the fog was thick enough to hide knives. Elias didn't go to the saloon that night. Not yet. That would be too obvious. Instead, he followed the money. He watched one of the front men, an ordinary-looking shipping clerk, walk into a bank building near City Hall. Elias waited a beat. Then he followed. Officers lined the corridor. Doors closed. Eerie silence. The clerk must have disappeared into one of them. Elias was frustrated he'd lost him. Elias moved slowly down the hall, pretending to study a notice board, counting doors, listening for voices. That was when he saw her. In the middle of the hallway, a woman knelt with a bucket beside her. Sleeves rolled, hands red from the water. She scrubbed the floor with slow, deliberate movements. She worked as if the task had no end. Why did she look so defeated? Elias slowed. There was something familiar in the shape of her shoulders, the way her hair fell loose at the neck, the way she kept her eyes down, never looking towards the officers. Was she the missing mother? She was too pale, too still, no inner light. She looked emptied. The truth settled in his chest. That was what Ravanos did. He didn't just kill women. He hollowed them out and put them back to work. Walking death. Elias stood there a moment longer, watching her scrub a stain that no longer existed. Then he turned and walked back toward the entrance. 40 minutes later, the clerk emerged with a stack of papers and a satisfied look that didn't fit his face. He walked fast, as if he wanted to be somewhere else. Elias followed at a distance, into the rougher edge of 5 Points. The clerk turned down a narrow lane and stopped at a building that used to be a warehouse. Now the front door was newly painted. New lock, new hinges. A sign hung crookedly above the entrance. Crowley Storage and Freight. Elias froze. His stomach tightened. Crowley's name. Not Crowley's business. Crowley would never run freight. Someone had hung that sign on purpose. A message, a warning, or a trap. Elias waited and watched the clerk knock. A slit in the door opened. A pair of eyes appeared. Clark said something Elias couldn't hear. The door opened just enough for the clerk to slip inside. Then it closed again. Elias stood in the fog, thinking. Crowley told him to stop. Someone threatened Crowley's family. Now someone was using Crowley's name as a cover. Ravanos didn't just build empires. He built them on stolen identities, on stolen lives. He built them on the assumption that no one would dare to pull back the curtain. Elias's hand slid into his coat, fingers finding the small pistol he kept there. He crossed the street and approached the warehouse door. He pressed his ear to the wood. Nothing. No voices, no footsteps. Just a faint sound beneath it all. A low hum, like machinery, or breath. He checked the lock. New, good quality. Elias glanced down the lane. Empty. Fog swallowing the far end. He took a thin pick from his pocket and worked the lock with careful patience. The click was soft. The door gave slightly. Elias slipped inside.
The air changed immediately. Too cold, like the building had never known sunlight. The hallway beyond was narrow, lit by dim lamps, spaced too far apart. Shadows pooled between them like black water. Elias moved slowly, listening. His boots made no sound on the worn wood. He passed stacked crates marked with ordinary labels. Flour, cloth, soap, but the smell was wrong, like something metallic and old, like blood. Elias's jaw tightened. He kept going. The hallway opened into a large storage room, crates on crates. Not all of them were sealed. Elias approached one, lifted the lid carefully, and recoiled. Inside were clothes, men's coats, women's shawls, children's shoes, not stored neatly, just dumped like scraps. Elias swallowed, forcing himself not to vomit. He looked around, eyes adjusting to the dim light. That's when he saw the ledger, leather-bound, thick, sitting on a table as if someone had just stepped away. Elias moved toward it, heart pounding. He opened it. Columns, names, addresses, business titles, payments, and besides certain entries, a symbol, not a dollar sign, a small inked mark shaped like two punctures. Elias's stomach dropped. Inventory, not people, inventory. He flipped pages faster. The network was enormous. Blocks, streets, entire districts. Front men listed like clerks in a company. Collectors assigned like employees. And each week, payments, disappearances. It was organized crime, rewritten into something colder than human greed. It was a machine built for the immortal. Elias heard something then. The sound came from behind Elias. A slow scrape along wood that did not belong to footsteps. He froze and thinned his breathing, then closed the book carefully, finger steadied despite the pulse in his wrists. The room cooled by degrees as Ravanos spoke, his voice calm and already amused. "You have a habit of entering rooms you don't own." Elias turned. Ravanos stood in the doorway, pale face, half lit by the lamp, coat unwrinkled, posture relaxed. Behind him, the shadows held two figures. Serafina leaned against the wall, openly smiling, her eyes moving over Elias with interest. Colette stood still, ledger tucked beneath her arm, gaze fixed on Elias's hands.
"You're buying blocks," Elias said.
Ravanos stepped forward, and the air compressed around him. "I'm organizing them." Elias raised the pistol halfway and aimed low. Ravanos noticed and smiled. "You're still pretending this ends with a weapon."
"People are disappearing."
Ravanos nodded once. "People disappear every hour in this city."
"The protection network is yours."
"Yes." The word landed clean and final.
"Why?" Elias asked.
Ravanos glanced toward the crates, where clothing spilled in careless piles across the floor. "Because New York rewards scale," he said, "and hunger grows faster when it's efficient."
Serafina laughed softly. "You built us the perfect city."
Elias's grip tightened. "You're turning it into a slaughterhouse."
Ravanos shook his head once. "I invest."
Elias shifted sideways, keeping the table between them. Crowley.
Ravanos' eyes returned to him. A practical man.
You threatened his family.
Ravanos inclined his head. I explained consequences.
Colette spoke without shifting her stance. You're already written down, Detective. The words settled with final weight.
Serafina pushed off the wall and circled closer, her steps quiet and deliberate. "You're better than most," she said. "You didn't run. You didn't beg." Her smile sharpened. "I want you in my bed, Detective. I'll give you a kiss and a bite you'll never forget."
Elias kept his eyes on Ravanos. You don't belong to him.
Serafina laughed openly. "I belong exactly where I am."
Ravanos lifted one hand and she stopped, obedient and amused. "You're close," Ravanos said. "Closer than you've ever been." He stepped forward again. This city is built on fear, and fear needs structure. Elias fired. The shot shattered the lamp above the doorway, and darkness swallowed the room. Glass burst and voices rose as Elias moved fast, angling between crates, firing once more into the shadows. A body struck wood, and hands reached for him. He twisted free and ran for the far exit, shoving crates aside as something struck him from the side. Pain tore through his shoulder, and he hit the floor hard. More hands closed in, stronger now, controlled. Teeth brushed his neck, testing. Ravanos' voice came from close. "Careful." The pressure lifted just enough for Elias to breathe as a bell rang in the distance, one note followed by another. Dawn approaching. Ravanos' presence tightened with irritation. "You wanted proof," he said. "You have it."
Elias spat blood. I'll burn this empire down.
Ravanos smiled. "You'll chase it." Something cut Elias's side, precise and deliberate, pain flaring and then settling. "That's the cost," Ravanos said quietly.
A shout echoed from the far end of the warehouse. "Elias!"
Serafina turned with mild curiosity. "He followed you."
"He always does," Ravanos replied.
Crowley burst into the spill of light, pistol raised, breathing hard. "Let him go!"
Ravanos did not turn. "You should have listened to yourself." Crowley fired, and a shape fell. The grip on Elias loosened, and he tore free, staggered forward, and collapsed into Crowley's arms. Crowley dragged him toward the exit, firing blind into the dark as they burst into the alley, and fog swallowed them whole. Ravanos did not follow. He stepped into the doorway instead, as dawn brushed the sky gray, stood untouched and composed, and watched them leave. "Next time," he called softly, "bring more night."
Crowley hauled Elias into a recessed doorway across the street, and Elias slid down the wall, blood soaking his coat. Crowley pressed a hand to the wound, swearing under his breath. "They came to my house," Crowley said. "Stood outside her window."
Elias nodded faintly. I know.
Crowley's face tightened. "What did you see?" Elias's trembling hand slipped into his coat. He pulled something out, a single torn page from the ledger, creased, blood-stained, but readable. Crowley stared at it. His breath caught. Names, addresses, the marks, the scale. Crowley's voice came out broken. "Jesus Christ!"
Elias swallowed, forcing words through pain. He's not hiding, Elias whispered. He's building.
Crowley looked up at the paling sky, then back at Elias, fear and fury mixing in his face. "We're dead," Crowley said.
Elias's eyes stayed locked forward. Not on the sky, not on the street, on the idea taking shape in his mind like a noose tightening. "No," Elias said softly. He coughed, blood on his lips. Then he whispered the truth that settled heavy in his chest. We're at war.
And somewhere in the city, beneath deeds and ledgers and backroom handshakes, Ravanos' empire kept expanding, quiet, efficient, and hungry, built not on violence alone, but on the most modern weapon of all, ownership. And the sun rose over New York like it didn't know anything at all.